I didn't think much of it the first time Roger showed up on my shift. Schedules change all the time where I work. People swap, call in sick, pick up extra hours, it's normal. So when I walked in for my usual late shift and saw him already behind the counter, leaning casually like he'd always been there, I just nodded and said, "Didn't know you were working tonight." He looked up, gave me that easy half-smile of his. "Yeah, figured I'd grab some extra hours." Simple. Normal. Nothing to read into. At least, that's what I told myself. The thing about Roger is, he wasn't just another coworker. He had this way about him that made people pay attention without even trying. Tall, broad shoulders, always wearing those slightly worn-in black tees that fit him a little too well. Not in a show-off way, more like he just didn't realize how he looked. Or maybe he did. We'd worked together for months before that, but on different shifts. Just passing interactions. Small talk in the break room, the occasional joke when our schedules overlapped for like 10 minutes. Nothing serious. But that night? It felt different. We ended up working side by side for hours, and I noticed something right away. He was more talkative than usual. Not overly chatty, just present. Like he was actually paying attention to me. "So, Peter," he said at one point, wiping down the counter next to mine, "you always take the late shifts?" "Yeah." I shrugged. "Less people. Easier." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away. "Makes sense." It should have ended there. Just another casual exchange. But it didn't. Because the next time I came in, he was there again. Same shift. Same spot. Same calm, almost too relaxed posture like he belonged there. I remember pausing for a second before clocking in, just watching him. Something about it felt off. Not wrong. Just noticeable. "You're here again?" I asked, trying to keep it light. He glanced over, that same half-smile creeping in. "Yeah. Guess I like this shift." There was something in the way he said it that made my chest tighten just slightly. Still, I brushed it off. Coincidence? It had to be. Except it kept happening. Once is nothing. Twice is whatever. But 3, 4, 5 times in a row? That's when your brain starts connecting dots whether you want it to or not. Every shift I had, somehow Roger was there too. And the thing is, he wasn't just there. He was around me. Not in an obvious way. He wasn't hovering or being weird about it. But he'd always end up working the same section, taking the same tasks, finding reasons to be nearby. Refilling stock at my station. Jumping in to help when I clearly didn't need it. Leaning just a little too close when we were both checking something on the register. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. I mean, I've been wrong before. It's easy to mistake normal friendliness for something more when you want it to be more. And yeah, I'll admit it. I noticed him. Of course I did. I wasn't blind. But I also wasn't stupid enough to assume anything. Guys like Roger? They usually had girlfriends. Or at the very least options. Meanwhile, I was the guy who kept things quiet, simple, predictable. So I ignored it. Or at least I tried to. Until one night, something small happened that I couldn't explain away. We were closing up, just the two of us. The place was quiet, lights dimmed slightly, that end of shift calm settling in. I was restocking behind the counter when I felt it. His hand brushing mine. It was quick. Barely anything. But it wasn't accidental. I know what accidental feels like. This lingered. Just for a second. I looked up immediately, heart already beating faster than it should have been, and he was watching me. Not intensely. Not aggressively. Just watching. Like he was waiting to see what I'd do. "What?" I said, a little sharper than I meant to. He didn't look away. "Nothing," he replied, quieter than usual. And that was it. No joke. No follow-up. No explanation. Just silence. But the air between us? It changed. I felt it. And judging by the way he didn't move right away, he felt it too. That was the moment everything shifted. Because after that, I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't random. Roger wasn't just ending up on my shifts. He was choosing them. And for the first time, I started wondering something I probably should have avoided altogether. Was he doing it because of me? Once that thought got into my head, I couldn't get rid of it. It sounds dramatic, but it wasn't like I suddenly became obsessed. It was more subtle than that. Annoying, even. Like this constant awareness sitting in the back of my mind every time I walked into work. Because now, I was looking for it. And once you start looking, you notice everything. The way Roger would already be there, like he timed it perfectly. The way his eyes would flick up the second I walked in. The way he'd straighten just slightly, like he hadn't been waiting, but also kind of had. It was small things. Always small things. But they added up. "You're early," I said one night, dropping my bag in the back room. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You're later than usual." I frowned. "I'm on time." He smirked a little. "Yeah. I know. That should have been nothing. Just banter." But the fact that he knew my exact timing? That stuck with me longer than it should have. And it didn't stop there. He started remembering things I didn't even realize I'd mentioned. Like what I usually grabbed for dinner during break. What days I looked more tired. Even the fact that I hated dealing with customers right before closing. "You want me to take front tonight?" he asked casually one shift. I blinked at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "You looked like you didn't feel like dealing with people." I stared at him for a second longer than necessary. Because yeah, he was right. But I didn't remember saying that out loud. "You don't have to," I said. "I know," he replied. And then he did it anyway. That was the thing about Roger. He never made a big deal out of anything. He just did things. And somehow that made it harder to figure him out. By the end of that week, I stopped pretending this was coincidence. There was a pattern. A very clear one. Roger was picking my shifts. And for some reason, he wasn't hiding it. The real question was why. I went back and forth on it more times than I'd like to admit. Maybe he just liked working nights. Maybe it was easier for him. Maybe I was reading way too much into normal behavior, like people always warn you about. But then moments would happen that completely messed with that logic. Like the time we both reached for the same box in storage. It was cramped back there, barely enough space for one person, let alone two. I should have stepped back. He didn't. So suddenly we were both standing there, way too close, hands brushing again, except this time neither of us pulled away immediately. I could feel his breath. That's how close we were. "Sorry," I muttered, even though I didn't move. He responded, barely a sound. Still not moving either. There was this weird pause, like we were both waiting for the other to break it. Eventually, I forced myself to step back, grabbing something random just to have a reason. My heart was beating way too fast for something that should have been nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. Not even close. After that, things got heavier. Not obvious. Just charged. Conversations lingered longer. Silences felt louder. And every time we ended up alone, closing shifts, slow hours, quiet moments, it felt like there was something sitting between us either of us was saying. I started catching him looking at me. Not quick glances. Longer than that. Like he wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. One night, I finally called him out on it. We were wiping down the counters, same as always, the routine almost automatic at this point. "You've been on my shift a lot," I said, keeping my tone casual. He didn't answer right away. Just kept wiping, slow, steady movements. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Yeah. That was it." No excuse. No deflection. Just, yeah? I let out a small breath, half amused, half nervous. "That's it? No reason?" Now he looked at me. And there it was again. That look. Calm on the surface, but something underneath it. I like this shift, he said. Same answer as before. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Or, I added before I could stop myself, you just like who's on it. The second the words left my mouth, I felt it, that instant shift in the air. Like I'd just stepped over some invisible line. Roger didn't react right away. Didn't laugh it off. Didn't brush it aside. He just stood there, looking at me. Really looking this time. And for a second, I thought I'd completely misread everything. That I'd pushed too far. Made it weird. But then, he stepped closer. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just enough. Maybe, he said quietly. And that one word? It hit harder than anything else he could have said. Because it wasn't a joke. It wasn't denial. It was something in between. Something real. And suddenly, all those little moments, the touches, the timing, the way he always ended up next to me, they all made sense in a way that made my chest tighten. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe what? His eyes didn't leave mine. Maybe I do. For a second, I didn't know what to do with that. Not because I didn't understand what he meant, but because I did. Too clearly. And that was the problem. Roger, I started, but my voice didn't come out as steady as I wanted. He didn't interrupt me. Didn't push. Just stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him, waiting. That somehow made it worse. Because if he joked, brushed it off, given me an out, I would have taken it. But he didn't. You're serious? I asked instead. His expression didn't change much. Still calm. Still controlled. Yeah. Just like that. No hesitation. My chest tightened, and I let out a quiet breath, glancing away for a second like I needed to reset. Because this, whatever this was no longer something I could pretend wasn't happening. You've been picking my shifts? I asked. A small pause. Then, yeah. Again. Straightforward. No excuses. I let out a short, almost disbelieving laugh under my breath. That's kinda insane, you know that? That got a reaction. Just a slight one, his lips twitching like he almost smiled. Is it? He asked. Yes, I said, looking back at him. Normal people don't rearrange their schedules just to. I stopped myself. He noticed. Just to what? He asked quietly. There it was again. That feeling of being cornered, not physically, but mentally. Like every step forward just pulled me deeper into something I hadn't planned for. I shook my head, trying to play it off. You know what I mean? I don't, he said. And the way he said it, it wasn't teasing. He actually wanted me to say it. I hesitated. Because once I said it out loud, there was no going back to pretending. But at this point, what was I even holding on to? You don't switch shifts like that unless there's a reason, I said slowly. And? He pushed. And people don't usually do that for no reason. His eyes stayed locked on mine. Who said there's no reason? That hit harder than I expected. I felt it in my chest, in the way my thoughts suddenly got tangled. Because he wasn't denying it. He wasn't even trying to soften it. He was just putting it out there. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. You're making this really hard to ignore. Good. That made me look at him again. Good? I repeated. He nodded slightly. Yeah. There was something different in his voice now. Still calm, but heavier. More intentional. I didn't want you to ignore it. And that shifted something in me. Because up until now, I'd been treating this like something accidental. Something subtle. Something that could be brushed aside if it got too real. But he wasn't subtle anymore. He was choosing this. Choosing to be here. Choosing to say it. Choosing me. The realization hit me all at once, and it made my stomach tighten in a way that wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Just intense. You could have just said something, I muttered. Roger tilted his head slightly. Would you've listened? I opened my mouth to answer. and stopped. Because honestly, I didn't know. A week ago, I probably would have laughed it off. Assumed he was joking. Found a way to make it not real. He wasn't wrong. Maybe not, I admitted. Exactly. Silence settled between us again, but it felt different now. Less confusing. More real. I leaned back against the counter slightly, trying to ground myself. So what now? I asked. It came out quieter than I expected. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Just honest. Roger took a small step closer again, not enough to trap me, just enough to close that space we kept dancing around. No, he said. We stop pretending this is nothing. My pulse kicked up. That's not really an answer, I said. It is, he replied. You just don't like it. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. No, I cut myself off again. Because I didn't actually have a clean argument. I wasn't confused about what was happening anymore. I was just deciding what to do with it. And that was a lot harder. Roger watched me for a moment, then his voice softened just slightly. I'm not asking you for anything crazy, Peter. I looked up at him. Then what are you asking? He held my gaze for a second longer before answering. Just stop acting like you don't feel it too. That was the one thing I wasn't ready for. Because everything else? I could deflect. Question. Analyze. But that went straight through me. I felt my chest tighten again, sharper this time. You don't know that, I said, even though it sounded weaker than I wanted. Roger didn't argue. Didn't push. He just looked at me, steady and certain. I do. And the worst part? I couldn't even lie properly. Because I had felt it. From the small touches. From the way my body reacted every time he got too close. From the fact that I'd noticed every single shift he showed up to, and hadn't asked him to stop. I swallowed, my voice quieter now. This could get messy. A small pause. Then Roger said, Yeah. No hesitation. No denial. Just acceptance. And somehow, that made it even harder to walk away. Because he wasn't pretending this was simple. He just didn't care. Or maybe, he cared enough not to avoid it. I let out a slow breath, looking at him, really looking this time. And for the first time since this started, I didn't try to ignore what was right in front of me. Yeah, I admitted quietly. It could. After that, we didn't suddenly jump into anything. That would have been easier. Cleaner. Instead, things got quieter. But not in a bad way. More like everything we'd been skirting around was finally out in the open, and now we didn't have to pretend anymore. Which, ironically, made every little moment feel heavier. More intentional. We went back to work like normal that night, but it didn't feel normal at all. Every time we passed each other, I felt it. Every time our shoulders brushed, every time our hands got a little too close reaching for the same thing, it wasn't accidental anymore. And the worst part? I wasn't pulling away like I used to. At one point, I was restocking near the back, half focused on what I was doing, when I felt him step in behind me. Close. Too close to be casual. You're quiet, Roger said. His voice was low, right near my ear. I exhaled slowly, not turning around. Thinking. About? I hesitated. Then, honestly, you. There was a slight pause behind me. Not awkward, just noticeable. Yeah? He said. I nodded a little. Trying to figure out if this is a really bad idea. And? He asked. I turned then, just enough to face him. He didn't step back. Of course he didn't. That depends, I said. Is it just this? I gestured vaguely between us. Or what? Or something that's gonna make work complicated. Roger studied me for a second, like he was actually considering it. Both, he said finally. I let out a short breath, almost laughing. Honest. You'd rather I lie? No, I admitted. That'd be worse. Exactly. There it was again. That frustrating, steady way he had of not dodging anything. It made it really hard to hide behind excuses. I looked at him for a moment, then shook my head slightly. You really don't make this easy. I'm not trying to, he said. And somehow, that didn't feel like pressure. It felt like clarity. Like he'd already decided he wasn't going to play games with me. Which meant if I stayed in this, that was on me. The rest of the shift passed in that same quiet tension. Not uncomfortable. Just charged. We didn't need to say much anymore. Everything was already sitting right there between us. By the time we were closing, it was just the two of us again. Of course it was. It felt like it always was lately. I was finishing up the last few things while Roger locked the front, the soft click echoing through the empty space. And then, silence. The kind that feels heavier than noise. I was wiping down the counter when I noticed him just standing there, watching me again. Not even pretending to do anything else. You gonna help? I said, not looking up. Or just stand there? A beat. Then, depends. I glanced at him. On what? He took a step closer. Slow. Measured. On whether you're still trying to talk yourself out of this. My grip tightened slightly on the cloth in my hand. Because yeah, I had been. Even now. Still weighing it. Still questioning it. But standing there, with him looking at me like that, it was getting harder to justify walking away. I'm thinking, I said again. You've been doing a lot of that, he replied. Someone has to. I've already decided. That made my chest tighten. Of course he had. That was the difference between us. He moved forward. I hesitated. That's how it always went. I set the cloth down slowly, turning fully toward him now. And what exactly did you decide? I asked. He stopped just in front of me. Close enough that there was barely any space left. That I'm not wasting time pretending I don't want this. My pulse picked up again. And if I don't decide the same thing? It wasn't a challenge. It was a real question. Roger held my gaze steady as ever. Then I stopped. That surprised me. I searched his face for any hint that he didn't mean it. Didn't find one. You would? I asked. Yeah. No hesitation. And somehow, that mattered. More than I expected. Because this whole time, I'd been bracing for pressure. For things to move too fast. For him to push. But he wasn't. He was just standing there. Waiting. Giving me the choice. And that made it a lot harder to say no. I swallowed, my voice quieter now. You're really putting this on me. A slight shake of his head. No, he said. I'm just not deciding it for you. There was a long pause after that. Long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. Long enough that I knew if I stepped back now, this would end right here. Go back to normal. Or at least, something close to it. But instead, I stepped forward. Just a little. Barely noticeable. But enough. Roger's eyes flicked down for a second, catching it. Then back up to mine. And this time? Neither of us looked away. You're making this really hard, I muttered. Yeah, he said quietly. Neither of us moved for a second. His hand brushed mine again. Slow. Deliberate. And this time? I didn't pull away. That should have been the moment something obvious happened. A kiss. A clear step forward. Something definitive. But it wasn't like that. Instead, it was slower. Way slower than I expected. His fingers didn't grab mine. Didn't pull. They just stayed there, brushing lightly against my hand, like he was giving me time to change my mind. I didn't. If anything, I shifted just enough so our hands actually lined up. Not fully holding. But not accidental either. And the second that happened, I felt it, that quiet shift again. Like something had clicked into place. Roger noticed. Of course he did. His eyes dropped briefly to our hands, then back up to me. There was something different in his expression now. Not smug, not surprised. Just certain. You're still thinking? He asked quietly. I let out a breath, shaking my head a little. Yeah. A small pause. But not about leaving. That got a reaction. Subtle, but real. His jaw tightened just slightly. Like he was holding something back. Good, he said. We stood there like that for a second longer than we probably should have. Close. Quiet. A little too aware of each other. And then I pulled my hand away first. Not because I wanted to. But because if I didn't, I wasn't sure how far I'd let it go. We should finish closing, I muttered. Yeah, he said. Neither of us moved right away. Then, almost at the same time, we stepped back. And just like that, the moment broke. But not completely. Because now it was there. Real. Acknowledged. Not something we could pretend away anymore. The rest of the night felt strange. Not awkward. Just different. We worked like usual, but there was this underlying awareness in everything we did. Like every movement had weight to it now. When we finally finished and stepped outside, the air felt cooler than I expected. I didn't realize how warm it had been inside until that moment. We stood there for a second, either of us rushing to leave. You heading straight home? Roger asked. Yeah, I said. You? He shrugged. Probably. Another pause. This one felt different from the others. Less tense. More open. Like we were both waiting to see what the other would do next. I shoved my hands into my pockets, glancing down the empty street. This is a bad idea, I said again, quieter this time. Roger didn't even hesitate. Yeah. I huffed out a small laugh. You keep agreeing with me. I told you, he said. I'm not pretending it's not. I looked at him, really looked this time. At how calm he was. How steady. Like he'd already accepted whatever this turned into. You're not even a little unsure? I asked. He thought about it for a second. Then, no. That answer shouldn't have been reassuring. But it was. In a weird, frustrating way. Must be nice, I muttered. He tilted his head slightly. You are unsure? I hesitated. Because the honest answer? Not about you, I admitted. That slipped out before I could filter it. Roger's expression shifted again, just slightly, but enough that I noticed. Then what? He asked. I exhaled slowly. Everything else. Work. Timing. What this actually meant. All the things that could go wrong. He nodded once, like he understood. Yeah, he said. That's fair. No arguing. No pushing. Just understanding. And again, that made it harder to resist. We stood there in silence for a moment longer. Then he stepped a little closer, not as close as before, but enough that it felt intentional. You don't have to figure all that out right now, he said. I glanced at him. No? He shook his head slightly. No. A pause. Just don't overthink this part. This part? I echoed. His eyes met mine. Us. That word settled heavier than anything else he'd said so far. Us. Not potential. Not maybe. Just us. I swallowed, my chest tightening again. You make it sound simple, I said. It is, he replied. I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head. It's really not. It can be, he said. And the way he said it. It didn't sound naive. It sounded like a choice. Like he was deciding to keep it simple, regardless of everything else. I looked away for a second, then back at him. You're not gonna let this go, are you? A faint hint of a smile. No. Of course not. I should have been more resistant. More cautious. But standing there, with everything already out in the open, I felt my resolve slipping. Okay, I said quietly. That got his attention. Okay? He repeated. I nodded once. Okay, we don't overthink it. Okay, he said. Simple. Just like that. But the way he looked at me after? That wasn't simple at all. It was something steadier. Something that told me this wasn't just a passing thing for him. And for the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself it was just one for me. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. But they didn't explode into something obvious either. It was in between. Which, honestly, messed with my head more than anything else. Because now there was no guessing anymore. No. Maybe I imagined it. No. He probably didn't mean that. We both knew. And somehow, that made every shift feel more intense. The next time I walked in, Roger was already there again. Of course he was. Leaning against the counter like always, but this time, when his eyes met mine, there was no pretending it was just casual. There was recognition. Something unspoken, but clear. "You're early," I said, dropping my bag down. He smirked slightly. "You're predictable." I shook my head, but I couldn't stop the small smile pulling at my mouth. Yeah? But it felt lighter. Not easier, exactly. Just more honest. We worked like usual, but now there was this quiet understanding underneath everything. When he stepped closer, I didn't automatically move away. When our hands brushed, either of us pretended it didn't happen. It wasn't constant. It wasn't obvious. But it was there. And it was building. At one point during the shift, we ended up in the back again, same cramped space, same narrow aisle. Except this time, when we both reached for the same thing, neither of us pulled back. We just paused. Standing there, way too close, hands touching. I glanced up at him, and he was already looking at me. "Still not overthinking?" he asked quietly. I huffed out a small breath. "Trying not to. Doing a bad job," he said. "Shut up," I muttered, but there was no bite to it. A small silence settled between us. Not awkward. Just heavy. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I moved first. Not much. Just enough to close the gap that was barely there to begin with. Roger's expression shifted slightly. Like he hadn't expected me to be the one to do that. "Peter," he started. But he didn't finish. Because now we were really close. Closer than before. Close enough that I could see the way his breathing changed just slightly. "You said not to overthink it," I said quietly. His eyes didn't leave mine. "Yeah. So stop talking." That did it. Whatever line we'd been circling for days? Gone. His hand came up, not fast, not rough, just steady, like everything else about him. He hesitated for half a second. Like he was giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't. So his fingers slid lightly against my jaw, tilting my face just slightly toward him. And then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. Wasn't messy or desperate. It was deliberate. Like everything he'd done up to this point. Slow enough that I could actually process it. Feel it. Decide if I wanted it. And yeah, I did. I leaned into it before I could second guess myself. That's when it changed. The hesitation disappeared. His grip tightened just slightly, pulling me closer, and suddenly it wasn't careful anymore, it was real. Not overwhelming. Just certain. My hand came up without thinking, gripping lightly onto his shirt, grounding myself in something solid because my head was definitely not steady anymore. Everything else faded for a second. The noise, the space, the fact that we were literally at work. None of it mattered. It was just him. And the fact that this thing we'd been building for days was finally happening. When we pulled back, it wasn't dramatic. Just a small break. Both of us catching our breath a little. Neither of us moving away. "You still think this is a bad idea?" he asked quietly. I let out a breath, still way too aware of how close he was. "Yeah," I admitted. That made him smirk slightly. "But you're still here," he said. I met his eyes. "Yeah. A pause. Then, before I could overthink it again, I leaned in this time. And that definitely wasn't a mistake. After that, there was no going back to pretending. Not even a little. It wasn't just the kiss, it was what came with it. The way we looked at each other after, like something had finally settled into place. We still had a job to finish, which was probably the only reason we didn't completely lose track of where we were. Okay, I muttered under my breath, stepping back just enough to create some space. We actually need to finish. Roger exhaled quietly, like he was grounding himself too. Yeah. But neither of us moved right away. That was the problem. Now that the line had been crossed, everything felt different. He looked at me for another second, then finally stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Right, he said, more to himself than me. We got back to work, but it was almost pointless pretending things were the same. Every time we passed each other, there was this pull. Not awkward. Not unsure. Just stronger than before. And the thing is, it wasn't just physical. That's what caught me off guard. I expected it to feel impulsive. Like something we'd get out of our system and move on from. But it didn't feel like that. It felt intentional. Like we'd both made a decision without fully saying it out loud. By the time we finally finished and stepped outside again, the air felt even colder than the night before. Or maybe I was just more aware of everything now. We stood there like we had the night before, but this time the silence wasn't uncertain. It was full. You okay? Roger asked. I let out a small breath, nodding. Yeah. A pause. Then, you. Yeah. Another pause. Then I huffed out a quiet laugh. This is where I'm supposed to say something smart, right? Roger smirked slightly. You could try. Not happening, I said. He stepped a little closer, not rushing it, just closing that space again like it was natural now. So what are you thinking? He asked. I glanced at him. Still think this might be a bad idea? He nodded. Yeah. But, I hesitated. But, he prompted. I looked at him properly. And this time, I didn't try to downplay it. I don't want to stop. That was the most honest thing I'd said so far. And I meant it. Roger didn't react immediately. He just held my gaze for a second, like he was making sure I meant it. Then he nodded once. Okay. Simple. But it felt solid. Not rushed. Not overwhelming. Just clear. I shifted slightly, exhaling. We probably need to not make this obvious at work. A faint smile pulled at his mouth. Probably. I'm serious, I added. I know, he said. We'll keep it normal. I raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly subtle. That's not true, he replied. I gave him a look. He paused, then shrugged. Okay, maybe not at first. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. This is gonna be a mess. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it won't be. I looked at him, trying to read if he actually believed that. The thing was, I think he did. Not because he thought it would be easy, but because he wasn't already expecting it to fall apart. And for some reason that made me feel steadier. We stood there a second longer before I finally shifted, nodding toward the street. I should go. Yeah, he said. Neither of us moved. Again. I exhaled, shaking my head slightly. We're really bad at ending conversations. He smirked. Yeah. Text me when you get home. That caught me off guard. Not because it was a big deal, but because it wasn't. It was normal. Simple. Like this wasn't just something happening at work anymore. Okay, I said. And I meant that too. I started walking, feeling his eyes on me for a second before I turned the corner. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't stuck in my head about it. I wasn't overanalyzing every detail. I wasn't trying to convince myself it meant nothing. Because now, it clearly meant something. And whether it got messy or not, I was already in it. I didn't expect it to feel different the next day. But it did. Not in some dramatic, life-changing way. I still woke up the same, still got ready for work the same, still tried to convince myself to keep things normal. But there was this underlying shift. Like something had settled. Or maybe started. I caught myself checking my phone more than usual. Which was new. Because I'm not that guy. But sure enough, there was a message. Roger, you up? It was simple. Of course it was. I stared at it for a second longer than necessary before replying. Me, yeah? A few seconds passed. Then, Roger, you working tonight? I almost laughed. Of course he already knew. Me, you already checked, didn't you? There was a pause. Then, Roger, yeah? I shook my head, smiling despite myself. Me, then why ask? Roger, because I wanted you to answer. That felt very on brand for him. I didn't overthink it this time. Didn't sit there analyzing what it meant. I just let it be what it was. By the time I got to work that evening, I already knew he'd be there. And yeah, he was. Same spot. Same posture. But this time, when I walked in, there was no pretending we were just coworkers. His eyes met mine immediately. And there it was again. That quiet understanding. I dropped my bag, walking over like it was the most normal thing in the world. You're predictable, I said. He smirked slightly. So are you. Yeah, but I don't rearrange my schedule for people. That's where we're different. I shook my head, but I didn't argue. Because at this point, there was no point. The shift started like any other. Except it wasn't. Because now, every little thing carried meaning. When he passed something to me, his fingers brushed mine, on purpose. When we stood side by side, he didn't leave space like before. And I didn't either. It wasn't obvious to anyone else. But to us? It was constant. At one point, we ended up in the back again, no surprise there. It was almost like we gravitated there now without saying it. I was pretending to organize something when I felt him step in behind me. Close. Familiar now. You're quiet again, he said. Thinking, I replied. He huffed softly. Still doing that? I turned slightly, just enough to look at him. Not the same kind of thinking. That got his attention. Oh yeah? I nodded once. Yeah. A small pause. Then I added quieter. I'm not trying to talk myself out of it anymore. That landed. I could see it in the way his expression shifted, just slightly, but enough. Good, he said. And this time, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like agreement. I leaned back against the shelf, facing him more fully. So what does that mean? I asked. For us. He didn't answer right away. Which was new. Roger usually had an answer. But this time, he actually thought about it. It means we don't pretend this is nothing, he said finally. I nodded slightly. We already crossed that line. Yeah. And it means we don't make it complicated before it needs to be. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds like something you came up with 5 seconds ago. A small smirk. Maybe. I huffed a quiet laugh. But I got what he meant. Don't overthink it. Don't rush it. Just let it be what it is. I looked at him for a second longer. Okay, I said. And this time, that word felt different. Not hesitant. Not uncertain. Just real. He stepped a little closer again. Not rushed. Never rushed. You sure? He asked. I held his gaze. Yeah. And I was. Not because I had everything figured out. Not because I knew where this was going. But because for once, I wasn't trying to run from something just because it might get complicated. Roger nodded once, like that was all he needed. And then, without overthinking it, I closed the space between us again. This time, it felt easier. Familiar. Like something we'd already chosen. Looking back on it now, it still makes me laugh a little. Because it didn't start with anything big. No dramatic moment. No huge confession. Just a simple realization that he kept showing up on my shift. On purpose. And somehow, that turned into something real. Something I didn't expect. Something I definitely didn't plan. But if there's one thing I figured out through all of it, it's this. Sometimes the things that seem small at first are the ones that change everything.